Hey guys, back with you for another television review, and on this video I'm gonna be reviewing the latest episode of HBO's miniseries The Outsider. So this is episode 5 and it's called Tear Drinker. This episode is directed by Igor Martinovich. I'll go with Igor Martinovich, so first time I've seen his name pop up, first episode he's directed, and it's written once again by Richard Price. So there you have it. So we're about halfway through the season now, the midway point. There's 10 episodes in this miniseries, and it's obviously been bubbling along quite nicely. I've enjoyed it so far. Last week, I think, was a slight down episode, but only in comparison with how good the first 3 episodes has been. So there was still lots of good meaty stuff going on. It just maybe wasn't quite hitting the highs of the opening 3 episodes. And similar this week, I think this week is again, it's just one of those strange sort of mid-season episodes where it just feels like they're like taking it down a notch before you kind of hit the big run towards the final episode, I think. And it just maybe not a whole lot going on this episode. It felt much slower. It felt like there was less important stuff going on, but at the same time it still felt it was still very effective in what it was doing. It wasn't by any means a bad episode. It just wasn't really hitting those heights, and maybe for the first time it felt like, yeah, it was sort of spinning its wheels a bit, but then again, who knows? I mean, that might be proven wrong when we see what there is to follow. But anyway, I think the jury's out a bit on whether this is going to justify the 10 episodes, because I think most miniseries tend to be 8 episodes, and that kind of feels like the perfect length. I mean, I remember Sharp Objects being 8 episodes, and to me that's an almost perfect series. I don't think I would change a thing about Sharp Objects, or hardly anything anyway. So maybe going the extra 2 episodes for this, bearing in mind it's one of these slow burning procedural type shows. I don't know, it might prove to be overextending itself a little bit, but only time will tell. But as I said, the last couple have felt, in comparison to the first 3, not quite as great. But this was still solid, but I would say this has been the weakest episode so far. So the plot is split more like evenly this week between Ralph's side and Holly's side. In fact, Ralph's side maybe is taking on more importance this week, and particularly his wife Janine, who we've only seen sort of on the fringes here and there. We saw her a couple of weeks ago play an important part in getting Glory's child to open up to her about her dream. So we've seen her here and there, but this week her character takes a more important role. So she's affected by the hooded figure, and she starts seeing images of this hooded figure, and she obviously works as some sort of a counsellor. So she sort of tells like her patients waiting for her in the waiting room, can you please put your hoods down, because there's a few of them with hoods, and there's this one particular character who in a green hood who doesn't pay any attention, and she has to tell him a couple of times. And then when she gets across to him, he's like passed out. He's either asleep or just passed out, and the scene sort of cuts there. But it's obviously kind of hinting then that could be the hooded figure we've seen, or it could just be a coincidence, and it might be, the writing sort of like playing that side up. So it's interesting then later at home, Janine doesn't really tell Ralph about it. She just mentions she's had a bit of a funny day, and she goes to mention the hooded figure, but then doesn't really commit to that. And Ralph is very preoccupied. He's as focused as ever on this case. And also this episode goes back to their son and him being gone now, and them still mourning him and the reaction. So we get another flashback around this part of the episode where we see Ralph is drunk and Janine is at home and she's on the bed. And it's quite a seamless little shot actually, because it starts off with Janine on the bed in the present day, where they've come home and Ralph is like, shall we order takeaway or something? Or it might be Janine who says it. And then after that you see her go upstairs to have a lay down. But then it cuts to the past where she's having a lay down and Ralph tries to get her up, and I think he's drunk, and Janine's still very much mourning the loss of the son and doesn't want to deal with it, so is very, very upset. But that becomes important later in the episode. But then Janine has what appears to be a dream where she's visited by the hooded figure again, and the hooded figure tells her, you have to get him to stop, you have to get him to drop the case. And Janine says why, and sort of whispers to him, says something, and the hooded figure says something's bad gonna happen, and I didn't pick up what the last part of the message was. But then it cuts to the next morning, and we've already seen Janine with a glass of water that she dropped the water and she cut her foot on the glass. So obviously that becomes kind of important, just because a lot of the other characters infected by this cycle have had cuts on them, like Terry did, for example. So Janine, without telling Ralph about the dream, she says, I think it would be wise for you to stop this case, otherwise something bad might happen. And I kind of like Ralph's response actually, because he rationalizes it by saying something bad has already happened. I just need to find out who's responsible, type of thing. A very sort of rational, like detective type response, but almost saying things have already gone too far, something bad has already happened, so someone has to do something about it, basically. So I sort of like that response. But the stuff with Janine and the sleepwalking and the figure appearing out of nowhere, it's really creepy stuff. There's some good direction and some very intimate, tight shots, some good shots from the side of the bed, so very sort of spooky, atmospheric moments. I think those are some of the best stuff in the episode. So I'll actually jump over to Holly's point of the plot now, because she actually, that connects to Ralph's side here. So Holly has been in taking photographs of the graves of like the other two cases. So the two people were accused of child killing or of committing murder. And she actually meets this guy who we find out later his name's Tracy, who's just like at the side of the grave of, it's either Heath's grave or his brother's. I wasn't quite sure which. I'm assuming maybe Heath, since he was the one locked up. And he's just this weird sort of presence who Holly tries to approach, and at first he doesn't respond, but then he's kind of like, he just said he's out of it and just says he fucked me up, or he fucked his brother up real bad, I think it is, and he fucked me up too, and then just sort of walks away. And we come back to Tracy later, but Holly phones Ralph and says, you know, can you take photographs around the grave of Terry? And when he asks her why, she doesn't really give him a straight answer. It's just one of Holly's like hunches. So again, Janine comes into it a bit more again, because in the next scene we see Glory with Ralph and Janine, and she's given them permission to have a look round the grave. And I think again that's sort of important, because Janine has been like the instigator a bit. She's been the go-between, so Glory trusts her a lot more than she trusts Ralph. And so a bit like the earlier episode, Janine has sort of used her influence to get Ralph in. And so Glory is a bit taken aback when Ralph says, can I take some photos? But she's not as completely against it or upset with Ralph as she has been. She sort of sees it as being a bit weird, but she gives him the go-ahead. So he takes pictures around the grave, and then he sends them to Holly later. And one exchange I do like between Holly and Ralph over the phone is that, because she keeps on like requesting all these different things, and she's got to go to this place and that place, and Ralph basically says, I can't really pay for any more plane trips for you. And I do like Holly's commitment to the case, because she says, oh, okay, fine, I'll just drive from now on. And we're actually getting to the point where she's got to come back home. But actually it's funny, because her driving sort of plays a part later on. But yeah, Ralph sends her the pictures and said, sorry, we can't supply you with any more planes, or we can't pay for any more plane tickets. And obviously there's going to be an interesting meeting of the minds when Holly returns and talks to like the group of people and Ralph in person. But anyway, sticking with Ralph, whilst they're at the grave, the other like detective points out that's the barn where Terry Maitland's clothes were found. So the barn is nearby, which obviously makes some sense. So that's when Ralph has the idea to talk to Jack. And Jack has, you know, a fair amount of screen time in this episode. We're still, apart from the fact that he seems to be controlled by the shapeshifter or whatever entity this thing is, that we don't get a lot more clues about actually what he's doing and you know what the plan sort of is. But Ralph approaches him and asks him about when he checked out the barn, and Jack just dismisses it, saying it was just a dead end sort of thing, and he's very nervous. He wants to get Ralph off the topic. Very sort of edgy. There's a very good scene actually. It's the same scene where they're at the police officers, the one who had the baby, who we've seen a little bit. They're at like a birth party to celebrate the baby being born, and again, Jack is very off with her. He's been affected throughout the episode. We saw early in the episode him just going nuts in the woods and just like screaming and calling the thing sort of, motherfucker, just tell me now what you want, or just kill me, just strike me down. And then it does strike him down. It gives him a little shot. But he's obviously very much still on edge. And the police officer, who you get the impression they're quite close friends, she says, why don't you hold the baby? And he's quite abrupt and says he doesn't want to, and says he's got to leave. And she follows him out and calls him out on it. But again, he's very vague, and he says, yeah, I don't want to hold the baby because I'm afraid I might pass something on to him or affect him in a negative way. And he's quite vague, but we've heard in the previous episode then this thing is sort of passed on like a virus. So yeah, that's interesting. That Jack's really paranoid about passing this thing on to the son of his close friend, but obviously he doesn't give away, and he then drives off. But the next day he approaches Jack and he says, or Ralph, sorry, I always do this with characters, and says, yeah, sorry about yesterday, but I would like to be involved in this case any way I can. And Ralph obviously says, well, this isn't official, the case has been closed, but, if you want to take part in the unofficial case, then, yeah, you can work with us, you can follow up the lead. So yeah, there you have it. That's stuff happening with Jack, but where this is going to leave it, it's sort of reaching to like this big like sort of collision point because of him being controlled by the spirit. And there's a nice little twist actually at the end of the episode with Ralph, which I thought was quite clever, where he's awoken by the hooded figure again. And it turns out it's his son. His son's there, and it's his son who repeats the message about, Dad, you really need to drop this case. You really need to move on. Well, not case, sorry, but he says, I told you, you need to let go. And, I mean, you might think then that's still a coincidence that he's having this image, but it might still not be exactly what the hooded figure is, and it might be a separate thing. But I sort of read it as that was what was happening, that it was the twist was, and it was actually the son, the spirit of the son, or like representate the son coming to them in a dream to sort of say, you've got to move on. So it wasn't about the case at all. It wasn't about like the hooded figure saying to Ralph, you've got to drop the case, otherwise I'm going to do something bad to you, something bad. Or it's more to do with, if you don't move on and stop grieving, something or bad will happen. So that twist did play quite nicely actually, and it was, yeah, clever little scene and moment to end the episode. So a bit more on Holly in this episode. She starts piecing little things together again. I do like the continuity of her returning to the bar and the waitress from last week. So she's again asking her all this weird shit to do with the case, all these different supernatural stuff, and it's sort of funny because the waitress is kind of engaged in it. You just get the impression she's really bored by her job and just goes along with it, is happy to chat about these things. And then Holly offers her, like, I don't know, something like $200 to drive her around because she now needs transportation. So that's some good stuff, because it means we might see a bit more of the waitress. So that could be interesting. And there's also a bit more with the security officer who Holly's having a bit of a casual thing with. And I actually like that Holly is watching a horror movie. I think it's in the scene when he calls, and he invites her down, says, I'm at the bar downstairs, and Holly says, well, I've got a mini bar up here, why don't you come up? And he comes up and they start discussing the case. And later, like the next morning, because they obviously spend the night together, Holly leaves him notes. So that's pretty good. Even though she's like leaves him the next morning without saying goodbye or anything, she actually leaves him notes about the case. So you can tell his interest is peaked, and he likes Holly. So I think he's gonna stick around and get involved in the case a bit more. But there's quite a funny little thing with Holly and the car and driving, because the next day there's an incident, and I mean, you just see her driving, so it's the next morning, and then her car gets sort of held up in traffic. And I'm not sure, it might not be anything, but I just wondered if, well, she wasn't driving, she was being drove, but it gets held up in traffic, and I just wondered if, again, that could be the kind of just something spiritual, just something working against Holly, perhaps. But what happened is there's like an incident with Tracy, with the guy who Holly saw at the graveside, and he holds this guy hostage. He just snaps, and we could see he was on edge like the previous day at the graveyard. And he just holds this guy hostage, and there's all these police there and helicopters. I mean, it's this mad sort of crazy sort of shit that we see sometimes with like the FBI and stuff, when literally there's only one guy with a gun, and yeah, but there's like loads of them and helicopters. Seems a bit over the top, but you see it a lot in TV shows and films. Whether there would be a helicopter, I'm not too sure. That seems a bit like made up, but anyway, whatever. It works for the scene. It's nice and dramatic. But anyway, he's threatening to shoot this guy, and in the end, he is shot. They kill him to say, because he pulls the gun on them. But then later on they find the mark on his neck, so he's been marked as well, which was actually the open shot of the episode. And yeah, they also noticed then his gun is empty, the gun he was pointing at the guy's head, and they sort of make a crack about it. But yeah, that's kind of weird, the fact that his gun was actually empty, no bullets. But yeah, that's another body, but another link in the chain, because he seems to know Heath and has some sort of connection to him. So another victim in the link between those characters. So there you have it. That's episode 5 of The Outsider. If you have seen it, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. and I'll be back next week with episode 6. So thanks for watching and goodbye.